greedy aunt served after screwing my family over. Hello, you beautiful people. I've been a frequent lurker in this sub. I don't know if this qualifies. I've had a story I wanted to share for a while now, but decided to let it come to an end before posting it. Now that I came back from the notary about an hour ago, I can finally close this chapter of my life. So here it goes. I'd like to start with the fact that I live in Russia, and am not a good storyteller. So, if you have any questions, please let me know, I'll try to clarify. This all begins about 3 years ago, at my grandma's funeral. She passed away at the age of 73, leaving behind 3 sisters, one of which committed suicide long ago, a plethora of grandkids and quite a lot of real estate. When the paperwork tsunami regarding inheritance started, something began to smell fishy. My alive aunt was extremely hesitant in giving us the death certificate, so we could start filing for inheritance. Things started to get complicated and confusing, so I had to take over all the paperwork and to help my mother out. I find out that the apartment my grandmother lived in, for some reason no longer belonged to her, but was signed off to the kids of my aunt. Upon further inspection, I realized that most of my grandmother's belongings were signed off to my aunt long before my grandmother's death. First, I decided to speak to my mom. She told me that on the date the papers were signed, my grandmother was already in pretty bad shape. Dementia and Alzheimer's had already gotten the best of her and she was not legally able to sign them. So, I decided to go to my aunt, still not wanting to believe that she screwed us over. I, sincerely believing that it was all an honest deal, asked her how it all happened. I will never forget her response. I never thought someone could say this to a relative. She told me that it was none of my business, that she intends to get everything she can, and the rest of the real estate that will be shared property, she will force out of. I was baffled. I couldn't understand how she could do something like this to my mother. I had to do something. The next day I spoke with my mother. She was shocked and devastated. In tears. She also could not understand how her own sister could do such a thing, especially after all the things she did for her, like helping her make a career in sports, helping with money during hard times, etc. etc. I knew we needed to go to court. The problem with that was, that my mother is a working pensioner and is still raising my 13-year brother, and I just spent all my savings on renovating her apartment. Money was an issue. Luckily, I made good friends with our company lawyer at work, and he offered to help me. We collected all the needed paperwork. He told me to document any further encounters with their family, and to keep an eye out for anything fishy. After that, we sent a letter to my aunt, saying that we will dispute everything in court. This is where my life became hell. It all started out with threat calls from her sons. That's no biggie. I recorded all of the phone conversations. They found out where I work and live and started stalking me. Again, no biggie. A while back, my boss made me an offer for a driver to pick me up to and from work, because the driver lived nearby me. About time I hit him up on that offer. So, I did. One morning, I wake up and get ready to work. My driver is downstairs waiting for me. I put on a coat and head downstairs. I open the door of my apartment complex and get hit in the face by my oldest cousin. He threatens me again and flees the scene. The driver runs up, helps me up, and tells me that it was all recorded on the car's front cam. Calls my boss, and takes me to the hospital. The next day, I take the video and all of the phone conversations to the police. They accept everything. When the police contacted my aunt, searching for her son that punched me, she was livid. She called me, and spat threats in the phone. I reminded her, that her son is already in trouble for threatening me. She hangs up. About a week later, I wake up in the middle of the night from loud banging on my door. As I'm walking to the door, it gives in and flies open. 2 large men walk in, stating this is now their apartment as well. Handing me the papers, they said, if you want to remain healthy, you should pack your shit and go. I call the police. Police comes, checks the paperwork, and it's totally fine. Turned out, my aunt hired professional. Let's call them professional inconveniences. They make money by forcing people to move out of shared homes. She gave them a part of her right of ownership, and they were legally allowed to move in. Next 3 months, I routinely had to pick my door because they kept changing the locks. Had to deal with constant loud music. Dirt and filth in my own house. Barely any sleep. After 3 months they gave up and left. Seeing that this didn't work, my cousin family decided to desperately duck with me. One night one of them walked into my apartment complex, and started spraying pepper spray at my door to try and lure me out. Unfortunately for him, I was cleaning the house and doing some minor work after the goons they hired. All of my doors were pretty insulated with rags and towels to prevent concrete dust flying everywhere. I barely smelled the pepper spray. Court was due next day. I barely convinced my mother to ask for her sister to be eliminated from hearing anything. After I showed the court video and audio of them threatening and assaulting me, it was done. The court ruled in our favor. Upon returning from court, I went to the police to tell them about the pepper spray incident. I was rushed into a room and questioned. Turned out my elderly neighbor died from lung complications caused by the PS. Here I am today. Just returned from the notary, where my mother signed all the real estate to her name. I got a significant amount of money for assault and threats. And my piece of shit aunt is left with her tiny apartment and a son in prison for assault, threats of violence and homicide. Her second son was fired from the rescue team and is no longer able to work for any government or social structures, and he doesn't know how to do anything else. They're bankrupt, and it serves them right. TLDR, my aunt tried to screw us over with inheritance. I found out. Her family threatened and assaulted me. One in court, left them barefoot, and one of them in prison. Again, I apologize for mistakes and any misunderstandings they may have caused. Edit, there still seems to be confusion about how my aunt got the goons in. I'll try to explain. You have what's called a right of ownership. Before my grandmother's death, she was the sole holder of the right. After her death and some manipulations from my aunt got about 3/4 of the right of ownership, and my mother got 1/4. Now you can do anything you want with the right. You can sell it, give it away, etc. Anyone holding the right has the legal ability to use the apartment/house. My aunt gave the goons a tiny portion of her right, so they could freely and legally enter and live. Now to the comments. Wow, that was one of the most violent pro-revenge I've ever read. I'm glad it worked out for you, OP. OP replied, thanks. I'm glad this ended. It was a struggle. I can imagine. Inheritance stories like that are baffling. Torn up families and such over money is downright stupid. Seems like she got what she deserved. How on earth were you able to live with the 2 dudes in your apartment? OP replied, it was a nightmare. As they were intending it to be. I pretty much only slept in my house. Came late, crashed from little sleep the previous night, wake up early, leave for work, repeat. I'm sorry, but after mentioning you lived in Russia, I couldn't help but read your story and now your comments in a Russian accent. I swear it seems like every car in Russia has a dash cam. OP replied, pretty much. Although this was a Bentley Continental with a built-in front camera. Now I'm imagining your boss as part of the Russian mafia. My aunt pulled the same shit on my mom and got everything. My mom asked just for family pictures and even offered to pay to have duplicates made. My aunt refused and even burnt any pic with my mom and my uncle in it. Years later I ran into her in a restaurant with her co-workers and she tried to introduce me to them like she wasn't a piece of shit. I said loud enough for all to hear that I wanted nothing to do with her, and how could you screw my mom and uncle over like that? You wouldn't even let them have pictures of Nana. You are a horrible person, and left. Hopefully she got ostracized by her co-workers, but I have no idea. OP replied, that's very sad to hear. Reading this infuriates me. I hope she gets what she deserves. I'm sorry for you and your mom. Things like this suck, and your mother seems like an incredibly sweet person. Shame things like this happen to such people. Karma will do its job in the end, hopefully. My mom was pretty devastated over the loss of pics and memories. So, the guy pepper bombed your apartment, and killed a neighbor with the fumes in the process? Poor guy. He had nothing to do with any of this shit. I'm glad everything turned out for everyone else. OP replied, "It's sad. I do feel I am a bit guilty for that.